All right, so our document to make this lenticular pattern to get started, we're just going to name it accordingly. And then we're going to use print presets, letter size, landscape, and units in points, because that's what our lines are all going to be measured in. All right. Yeah, I thought typically the line tool is with your shapes. I must have moved mine at some point. So if you're not finding it, just let me know. I'll help you find it. But we're going to choose the line tool, and you want to, how do we make a straight line as opposed to being like at an angle? Anybody know a key that we could press to constrain it? Nick? Hold shift. Good. All right. So make a vertical line about 2/3 of the height of the document, and we want that to be 1 point. Rob, how do I know what the thickness of that line is? Or is my line 1 point? The stroke, yes. So in our properties, right, we see it here as 1 point. And that's why I told you to put your units all in points, because I think by default it's in inches. All right. Anybody need me to go over that part up to that point? All right. So the next thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to convert this from a line to a shape, basically. So as they're saying here, we're going to go up to the object pull down and select path, and then we're going to say outline stroke. All right. So it doesn't look like it did anything, but if I undid that just to kind of maybe illustrate this and go to what's called the outline view, all right, I can see that this is just like the straight line there, and then if I go to object, as we did there, an outline stroke, it becomes a little more solid. And there's another way. If you change the layer color of it, you can kind of see the properties of that a little bit more. All right, but so we outline that stroke, and now we're going to make copies of that, all right, which I believe is the next step, right? So, Emily, what's number 2 say?
Move a copy 1 point over. And this is object, transform, move.
All right, so what does that stuff? What does that stuff in parentheses mean?
You go up to object.
Right.
And then the transfer.
Yes. All right. So that is our kind of our path, or our breadcrumb trail almost. Sometimes you hear that of directions. So with that line selected, all right, I'm going to go to Object, Transform, and Move. All right. So in here you have some settings. So we want 1 point in horizontal, 0 in vertical, and your angle should kind of be at 0. And then we want to have another instance of it, or a copy, so we're going to press copy. All right. So now we have 2 lines. All right, if I zoom in really close, I can see that I do indeed have 2. Actually, I shouldn't say lines because we converted them to shapes. All right. So you should be able to see something like that. All right. And then we could repeat that same process of moving it, because remember we talked when we started, we want that ratio of 6:1. But in Illustrator, to repeat the last command, you can press Control D. All right, so if I do Control D, it just made a copy of that. So now I have 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so if you press Control D 4 times, you should get 6 lines or shapes. And if you select all of them, right, do a box select, it should show up as 6 points. All right, so that'll prove that we do have that 6 point, or that combination of those things together. All right, I'll come around and check on everybody on that. That we're a little bit off, so we can fix that though. Ideally, it should be a total of 6. But what we're going to do now is, so we have these individual shapes, so now we're going to combine them or merge them into one. What tool have we learned how to do so far that could combine shapes together? Brianna? Grouping kind of just makes them selectable all at once, but it doesn't combine them. Francisco? Unite, yeah, so that's in our Pathfinder, or merge, right? So yeah, over here, if you don't have this panel open in your properties, then you can go to Window and select Pathfinder. All right, so this is one way we can go in here and we can unite. And then if your value is off for that 6, just type it in. All right, so that's one way we can unite. There's also, you just select them all, and then in that Pathfinder window, find that one that says unite, that combines it. Merge will also combine them. And we could have also used the shape builder tool, right? Remember we talked about that? So we select that, and then we could just kind of click and drag through to combine them. It all does the same thing. It makes them all into a shape, all right, which should be 6 points wide. All right, did we all get to that point, or should I combine again? All right, we're almost there, a couple more steps. All right, so now we have this one shape that is 6 points wide, and then we want to have a space. So they kind of talked about in the tutorial about making a white space out of another rectangle, but I'm going to kind of shortcut, cut a corner a little bit. So if we move this again, if we make a copy, how could we get it so that we can have a 1 point space in between this object and the previous one? Anybody think about that? All right, well, let's think about this. Like, so if I have a rectangle, right, and let's just say, we'll just put in a number here, 40, right, as our width. So if I wanted to put this rectangle next to the other one, I could just move this over, or actually if I did that move and transform, right, because that's what we did with the lines before, right? When we had it copy over and put directly next to it, we just put in the width of the object, right? That line was 1 point. When we wanted it directly next to it, we just copied it over 1 point. So if this rectangle was 40 and I wanted to put it right next to it, what would my horizontal value be? Nick, did you say something? Well, 41, so are you saying to make a space or to put it right next to it? To make a space, yeah. So we can offset that, right, because 40 would be directly next to it. So in this case, 41 would give us a 1 point space. So what are we going to put in here when we move this and make a copy of it? If this is 6 and we want a 1 point space in between this and the next object, how'd you get 8? Because 6 and a 1 point space is 6 plus 1 is 7. Now, because, well, you can always test it, right? So if we do object transform move, right, if I said 6, that's putting it directly next to it because that's the width of those 6 lines, right? So instead, if we put in 7, just like we talked about with that example, now we're going to have a 1 point space in between those two. So I selected my merged shape. I went to move, and I'm going to make a copy that's offset by 7 points. So now I have, because it skipped basically that other space there, and I can just repeat that now across. So I'm just going to Control D. And actually, I can actually hold down the D, and it'll just kind of keep filling in. Transform. It is in the directions. All right, so that's giving us this pattern going across. Now we'll notice if we look at this layer inside of it, it creates all these individual paths. All right, this would make it very difficult when we go to do our process tomorrow. So what we're going to do is we're going to select all this, and this is a good illustrator thing to know also. This little button on the side, well, if we press this, it'll select everything in the layer, all right, as opposed to, you know, and maybe you're doing something in the future, like if you only want to, sometimes it's hard, like especially something like this with the lines like really close to each other to select it, but you could use this target method to select any object or any part of that layer rather than using your selection tool to grab onto them. All right, but anyway, we're going to select everything on that layer, and now if we say Object, Compound Path, and Make, now when we look inside that layer, it's just one kind of composited piece of artwork. All right, so that was just selecting everything, and then we said Object, Compound Path, Make. And as you can see here, we could release that also. If you wanted to get your layers back, you can always kind of undo that. So, and rather than undoing, that's what we would call a non-destructive type of edit, right? Because we could do 5 other things, and then we come back, and it's still kind of in there. All right, and then the last part is just going to be adding your name so that when you print these out, you know which one's yours, and I will be collecting that. All right. So it doesn't really matter how many lines you have, the height of it, but it should fill a majority of the page there. And then, you know, you can kind of have fun with fonts if you want. All right, and then we're going to print, and you should be seeing something like the M551 on the BK server. All right, we don't need any trim marks or anything like that. And make sure you definitely save it though, so that tomorrow we can pick up from there and you don't have to start over again.